Bonjour et bienvenue. Je m'appelle Nathalie Bull, Directrice Générale de la Fiducie nationale. Welcome everyone, my name is Natalie Bull. Welcome to this gathering of the heritage sector entitled Adaptation, How Our Heritage Places, Organizations, Fundraising and Advocacy Strategies are adapting now to so many changing realities. I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik people here in New Brunswick on the banks of the beautiful Wolastoq River. And I know we're all calling in virtually from different places, and it's important for us to take a moment and acknowledge the territories and the culture and languages of the people whose territories we have the privilege of participating from today. It's an important thing for us to do as part of our work toward reconciliation. Bonjour, j'aimerais aussi encourager les participants de parler dans la langue de leur choix. We'll be watching the chat box. If you'd like to ask questions in English or French, please do, and we'll do our best to respond to them. But the session today will largely unroll in English, possibly, although we do have some great Francophone colleagues with us on the call. So it's been a really amazing few months, and we've been really pleased to bring these gatherings to the sector. Personally, I've been working in this field for almost 30 years, but I've never felt more keenly that our work is really essential and increasingly complex. We've been talking for decades about the need for better incentives and better protection and citizen engagement for heritage, but really in the last few years, the world has been changing rapidly around us. And so I think we all feel the imperative to loosen our focus on fabric and understand the power of intangible heritage. We are facing the responsibility and the opportunity to learn from other worldviews and to embrace them, to be part of a movement of reconciliation, to build new relationships with underrepresented communities, and to share power and make space for them in the work that we do, and to let go of outmoded ways of thinking. So we really have huge opportunities to respond to a global climate crisis with our work, the work that we do to save and renew buildings, and the imperative to understand and respond to the impacts of a global pandemic on places that matter and the people who care about them is a new twist for the work that we do. So I'm really pleased to be convening this conversation today with leaders of provincial and territorial heritage organizations who are here today to share how they see organizations, heritage places, adapting and finding new strategies to address all of these new challenges and opportunities. It's an informal conversation. The session will be recorded, and we'll share the recording out with everyone following this session. And so we have a handful of questions that we thought might spark a conversation today, and we'll move to that slide, please. So what matters now for your heritage organization? How are you rethinking operations, fundraising, program delivery? What are you doing differently? And what are the silver linings that are surprising you? So I'm just going to open up the floor and encourage my colleagues here who lead organizations across the country to jump in and share their thoughts from their organizations and perspectives. So who would like to jump in first?
Hi, Natalie. It's Paul in BC. It's Paul Gravett calling from Heritage BC. One of the things we did over a number of months with the BC Museums Association was to look at the health of the sector in BC. And not surprisingly, it's not entirely healthy, and certainly exposing some of the problems. I thought I might just go through some very quick findings, if that's okay, Natalie.
Please.
And so we found that 70%, the survey concluded in September, so just a little over, about a month ago, 70% of the not-for-profit organizations had not even begun recovery at that point. And 60% of the not-for-profits feel they will not recover until 2021. So a theme coming through the survey is it's a long tail. And of course, the situation is changing all the time in Canada, and that the recovery may become even longer. Interestingly, a third of organizations feel that recovery may not be possible at all. They didn't explain exactly what they mean by that, but they definitely see that there's significant change coming for them. Another surprise that came out of it, we didn't have a lot of local governments respond to the survey, and in BC, only 1 in 4 local governments have some form of a heritage program. But in this survey, we found 46 of those responding, local governments responding, do not believe a full recovery for their heritage programs will be possible. And that's particularly sobering, considering that we don't have the strongest situation in BC. And 83% of all organizations, so not-for-profits, for-profits, and local governments, 83% feel they cannot return to normal, whatever normal was, but they feel that there has to be some kind of new normal. And I guess the big challenge before certainly Heritage BC and probably many of us on the call is, what is this new normal? How do we define it? How do we find it? How do we move forward into that? An interesting point we found, not-for-profits felt they were less successful in managing the situation through the pandemic than their local governments and not-for-profit organizations. We found that not-for-profits were probably less prepared to meet the challenges, lower salaries, poor compensation packages, personnel policies are not in place, health packages are not in place for a lot of organizations, whereas it's very common, of course, with local governments and with not-for-profits. So it means when they were hit with closures and furloughs, there's less of an infrastructure for the not-for-profit sector. And then just finally, I'll mention, not surprisingly, of the 6 main concerns that not-for-profits gave us, 3 are related to finances. So fundraising, revenue contingency planning, and financial planning in general. And to that, they added community partnerships and online programming. And I tend to look at those as somewhat similar under the banner of programming. And then the third, volunteer recruitment, training, and retention, where we're finding that volunteers, at least by September, had not, by and large, been returning, and perhaps may not return to the organizations, which goes back to the questions or ideas around compensation packages. How will organizations survive if they depend, as many do, on volunteer staffing? So I'll leave it with that, Natalie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. And it's interesting, the work that you've done in BC has really set a high standard for collecting information from various parts of the sector, both the museums and the historic sites, but I think the broader sector as well, other people who make their living working in heritage. And it's interesting, I know you were part of submitting information to a new recovery table that's being led under the banner of the Cultural Human Resources Council. And I think it's the first time heritage organizations are being brought to that table, which normally looks more at the state of affairs for the arts and culture sector. So I think it's important that heritage organizations are all part of collecting and feeding that information in, so that we are part of the considerations that are being made. And I think they're looking at all of those, many of those areas that you've mentioned.
And if I may, Natalie, I would say, I'll first admit this is a bit of a personal issue for me, having worked in not-for-profit for quite a long time now. We have created the situation, we allow for, and we accept low pay. We say not-for-profits, we live under, poor or have to work with poor circumstances, and we just simply accept that and not, by and large, change it. And I think with CHRC and with the evidence that we're receiving, we need to start to change this and say the not-for-profit sector, the heritage not-for-profit sector, needs to address some of these issues for staffing, compensation packages, volunteerism. And what that looks like, I'm not quite sure, but we certainly need to address the standards.
Right, thanks, Paul. And I think sorry.
Sorry, Natalie, I was just going to, it's Beth
Sure.
Hannah. I was just going to jump into that discussion. I'm interested in what Paul was saying specifically about volunteers, and I'm not setting aside all of the rest of the discussion. I just wanted to focus for a minute on volunteers, because I think a lot of us across the country work with volunteer organizations, and we all know that those volunteer organizations are not exclusively, but largely older members of the community. And I think we're going to see a significant shift away right across the culture sector, in arts organizations, in community organizations, and in heritage organizations that rely currently on that volunteer participation. I mentioned in our earlier conversation that the Ontario Heritage Trust has partnerships across the province with all manner of organizations that assist in providing that local perspective, that local energy around the operation of a number of our sites across the province. And whether it's a site that we own and operate directly or a site that we own and operate in partnership, the drawback away from volunteerism is going to have a significant impact. And one of the things we're looking at is how do we support those organizations differently as we move forward. And I have no answers for that. I just know that it's a challenge that we're facing and that we're going to have to work through. Partnerships on program, I'll talk about when we get to that point in our conversation today, but I did want to just jump in there from Paul's research and Paul's work.
Great, thank you very much, Beth.
I also,
sorry, go ahead.
I can, Natalie, just to kind of echo what Paul and Beth have said, that what I'm seeing is we also work with a lot of volunteers, volunteer organizations, but this is an issue that is being felt throughout the nonprofit sector, not just in cultural arts heritage organizations. It's everywhere, and it's from the very top, the board level, all the way through to program volunteers. People volunteer differently than they did in the past. And so this is just exacerbating what was already an issue percolating below the surface for an awful lot of organizations. And I think it, more than maybe even the financials, will cause the demise of some smaller organizations, is they just can't find those volunteers. And it kind of goes to what Paul was saying as well about the way we compensate staff in nonprofits. Is the nonprofit sector has been built on this idea that we can just do everything with volunteer labor. And it doesn't work that way anymore when you're having to do so many different things in so many different ways. So I think that's an issue that it's an opportunity in a way for the heritage sector, for cultural organizations to work with the broader nonprofit community to see how we can work on some of these kinds of fundamental issues together.
Right, absolutely. Are other leaders of organizations on the line? How are you tackling this question of the human resource side of current impacts?
So I'm Kay Algie from Architectural Conservancy Ontario, and I've noticed kind of paradoxical things. On the one hand, I think going digital has increased participation from our branches across the province. We no longer have to travel to meetings and so on. So I think we've had more participation, and people have become more engaged in some ways. But I think at the local level, it's been a real challenge for people to kind of transfer that to local activities, like to local meetings, or thinking about how we could do events in a different way. So I know some of our branches have managed to continue doing tours of, for example, the prisoner of war camps at Bowmanville and so on. And some have done some online presentations, but I think that's the big challenge. And I think it's particularly a challenge for people to have to learn new skills and to become enthusiastic about this new opportunity. So I see that as a big but very important challenge for us to somehow grapple with, because I think for the next probably year, maybe less, that will be the way we have to work, certainly next 6 months. And I know myself, I don't know enough about how to have a good online conversation, like to transmit this to a local level and so on. So that's stuff I'd like to learn from others.
Right. No, thanks, Kay. I think it is more than ever before. I think we know that we're now in the people business, and I feel that we've been caught a bit flat-footed in not necessarily having information or the ability to contact all the parts of the sector that make up the heritage workforce. So this connection with the Cultural Human Resource Council could be a valuable one to help us get our act together in that regard. Kay, you started to talk about digital and new technologies, and maybe that's a good segue for us to talk about how organizations are rethinking the way they do business, operations, fundraising, delivery of programs. I know with the National Trust has come through our first virtual conference with lots of learning, but lots of positives and benefits and challenges with those new ways of delivering. Anyone on the line like to share some examples of their successes in pivoting to a virtual world?
Matthew Mcrae here with the PEI Museum and Heritage Foundation. I'm relatively new in my role. I only started acting as executive director in June, but before that I was curator of history here. And we've really tried in the last year approximately to increase our digital presence. We've launched a podcast. We went from having basically inactive social media accounts to having very active social media accounts, and trying to do outreach through there. And it kind of plays back into that personnel issue. Is if we really look at who our clientele were, and I would imagine that this exists for many heritage organizations. We were looking at a mixture, our volunteers and our members were generally older, older Canadians, much less diverse demographic than exists even here in PEI, where people consider us to be maybe a little bit less diverse than other parts of the country, but we still have large groups that are really not represented in our organization here. And on top of that, people visiting our sites were mainly those members and tourists and then families, young families. But there's no, the level of engagement there is, you visit with your family and then you go, and that's basically it. So we've really been, the digital is a key part, I think, of engaging a wider audience. And I'm not just talking about younger, because I know that people often think, oh, digital, it's all about youth. And yes, for sure, that is part of it. But it's a wider strategy. There's lots of people from all backgrounds and all ages that are now using digital. And this was even before the pandemic. That's just sped things up. So as a curator of history, I recognize that we don't have the budget to put on major exhibitions. And now, of course, major exhibitions are kind of on hold for the foreseeable future. So we really felt that we wanted to start creating products that would appeal to a wider swath of people. So it's also about the topics you discuss. You can't just go digital and expect people to find your information interesting if it's not speaking to them. And I think that's where sometimes people see digital as a solution, but really what digital allows you, it gives you the opportunity to show how you are relevant to people's lives today. And that's really what we need to do, I think, if digital outreach is to be successful, because it's all about relevance. People have to think of your organization or as of heritage itself as being something that can speak to their everyday life in some way, shape, or form. And so that's what digital can allow us to do, because we can reach people, we can discuss things that maybe we wouldn't be able to discuss with people online or offline. So that's my ramble for now.
Great, thank you very much, Matthew. There's some interesting insights about the increasing importance of our voice, our digital voice as organizations. So, other thoughts about working differently, using new platforms?
Here at the Museums Association of Saskatchewan, we were serendipity came to our aid because we offer a series of basic courses for museums spring and fall, and we had already begun to translate them into online versions. So we're able to pivot right away in the spring and offer the 2 courses we were going to be offering live as online versions. And then we for the fall, we are also offering online. And one of those silver linings that surprised us was all 3 of the courses we were offering this fall filled up to capacity before the first one started. So we're now looking at perhaps doing a winter session as well. And our membership tends toward that older demographic as well. And I don't let them get off by saying we don't know technology. They all do Facebook and know how to use computers to keep track of their grandkids. So we take full advantage of that. And we've also been doing, through the pandemic, community chats, very much like this gathering, for our members to get together. And that's been very, very useful. In fact, that's what we're going to be using to share the sessions we couldn't have face-to-face at our conference in the spring. We're going to have those presentations at each of these bi-weekly meetings. So it's a matter of just shifting how you think and figuring out things like Zoom for get-togethers rather than a face-to-face. You don't get the coffee and cookies, but you get at least to chat with people, which is better than the alternatives.
Thanks, Wendy. And I'll just encourage people listening in, don't hesitate to send in your questions or make comments in the chat. We're watching the Q&A, and if you'd like our panelists to address any particular topic, don't hesitate.
I'm just going to jump in here, Natalie, too. It's Ingrid Kazikoff, CEO of Heritage Saskatchewan. And when I think about, how we're rethinking operations, fundraising, and program delivery, certainly we are rethinking operations. I've always had staff that have worked remotely, and that wasn't as difficult a transition for us. I do have a couple that are within the office, but even there, even changing daily, addressing increases or decreases in COVID cases. And in Saskatchewan, we don't have a multitude of them yet, but it's on the rise again. So that leads us to weekly be having conversations about keeping up with how we want to engage with one another within the office space. Program delivery, the pandemic hit right in the midst of our provincial, our Heritage Fairs program. And luckily, we were adjusting to a virtual setting because there had been a threat of a teacher's strike in Saskatchewan. So we thought, well, how are we going to do this anyways? But the pandemic basically had us having to work much more quickly at this. And so we did offer a virtual program. The challenge, I think, right now with any kind of program is, for how long are we going to continue to do this, and what are we going to take away from the pandemic and continue to do? So we probably, for example, will continue to offer something virtually, but are we also looking, even for example, this year at being able to offer face-to-face gatherings? And that changes, and I'm sure it is for everybody, changing weekly, monthly, whatever. So it's the great unknown, I think, that it becomes a challenge. But probably our biggest challenge will be how we have two particular programs, the Fairs program and our awards program, that we have often asked or done some fundraising around. So now we're going to have to figure out how we're going to do those programs virtually and still maintain and potentially seek other funders to assist with that. And so we're recognizing a need to have to probably initiate more virtual digital fundraising opportunities to seek out additional sponsors. And that is something that I'm particularly interested in going forward, how other agencies are going to be doing that. And we're not alone with that. That's across the board within cultural organizations, but I think throughout the nonprofit sector. So.
Right, thank you, Ingrid. I wanted to ask
if I can just jump in quickly and add to what Ingrid was just saying about organization. So with Heritage Saskatchewan, I do community engagement. And so this year, of course, I haven't been able to actually go out into community. And so that's posed both challenges and opportunities in that, of course, you miss out on a lot when you're not able to interact face to face. But as we know in Canada, we have very large geographical areas to cover. So being able to offer things virtually, and now because people are being forced to interact virtually, it's enabled us to reach communities and individuals that maybe we wouldn't have been able to in the past. That's a great opportunity, of course, and a silver lining. But I will also say that I'm one of those employees Ingrid mentioned who I've worked from home for several years now. And I've actually noticed that since COVID, now that everyone's working from home and there's such an increase in online virtual presentations and offerings, it's actually increased my workload a lot. And so that's something I think a lot of people are facing right now, is actually that possibility of burnout, even though we're at home. And so to add to what Ingrid was saying about offering online workshops and symposia, it's a great opportunity to do that and to connect to and collaborate in ways we haven't been able to in the past. But I think we want to be really careful about how much we offer and how much we ask of people, because it's a lot. It's a lot, and burnout's real, and we know Zoom fatigue is real. And so I just wanted to add that, as Wendy mentioned as well, you know, how to deal with volunteers and burnout online. It's a big issue that I'm dealing with every day in my own workload. So I think we have to be careful too about our employees and making sure that that we're all managing our time in a way that, you know, that we can have some work-life balance when we're right in our own homes, right? So I think we all kind of know that, but I just wanted to make that clear from my perspective here at Heritage Sask.
Thank you, Kristen. I think we're all, I keep using this phrase that we're drinking from the fire hose. We're all trying to do so much, and pivoting, it takes so much more time figuring out how to do things differently. So you're right that we do have to be kind to each other. Earlier this year, I wanted to ask Beth Hannah if she might say a few words about virtual visiting and alternate experiences of historic places, because I know that's something many organizations are looking at as well. And the National Trust earlier this year normally would run Historic Places Day as a single day in-person on-site event across the country. And we pivoted with what we thought was the genius idea with the support of Parks Canada to turn it into a 2-month-long celebration of historic places. And I think what we didn't bargain for in putting that plan in place was the real sort of exhaustion of trying to maintain the momentum of an online event like that over a long period. So we're all figuring it out, I think. Beth, would you say a few words about Doors Open in Ontario?
Sure. So the Ontario Heritage Trust has run a Doors Open program for many years. It has typically a May to October season with events held over various weekends in various communities. And it's very much an event that we build with communities every year, and with funding support from sponsors and grant givers. And this year, of course, we had to shift. We had to shift our thinking to a digital platform and recognize Initially, we weren't sure whether it would be for the whole of the season or whether it would be just for a couple of months. It's clear that Digital Doors Open Ontario is now running through to the end of the year. We've been able to take it beyond its typical season, and we've had very good response to it. We have coming up to 200 virtual tours on the Digital Doors Open platform. We've had a lot of pickup from the media in highlighting this as a program, and we've built some interesting relationships with some new partners. So there's a silver lining in there for us and the ability to shift that conversation, but I think it will also impact the way we operate Doors Open Ontario in the future. I think we're anxious to go back to a feet on the ground, people in the sites model that we like and that we're used to, but I think it will now always be enhanced by a digital opportunity that gives people that opportunity to perhaps see behind the scenes or see something in the collection they might not otherwise see, or some aspect of the site that they might not otherwise have an opportunity to experience. So we've learned a lot in this process of shifting to a digital platform. We've had very good success. We've had some lessons learned that will carry forward into our planning for the future, but I also think it will shift our program and enhance it as we go forward. And we found the same thing through social media and some of the other public platforms that we've been using to get the message out, that the silver lining is that there is an increased visitation to our sites, our websites, and a real interest in some of the work that we're doing across the province that's reaching perhaps into communities we wouldn't have reached before.
Thank you,
Natalie, Jane Severs here from Newfoundland. I'd just like to suggest that there's been lots of discussions on how to monetize digital content, and I think there's an opportunity to rethink how we look at the potential audience for digital content. I think currently a lot of people are looking at it as the audience as consumers, and I think there's an opportunity to kind of rethink that and to look at the potential viewers of digital content as patrons. And I mean, I think there's a really interesting example. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with YouTube's Patreon, in which people pay a pay what you can monthly subscription, a monthly patronage fee, and that gives you access to additional content that only other patrons can view. And so I think that we already, most heritage organizations have a membership program. So I think there's an opportunity to offer digital content as either a standalone kind of patron perk or built into the membership model as a way of bringing more people into your membership. And I think that membership is super important because you ladder people up from kind of, people who view your stuff to people who purchase memberships to people who give donations to people who serve on your, in volunteer capacities. So I think we need to think of digital content, not just as kind of something we're selling to people, selling, passes to, but ways in which that we can ladder people up into the way they participate in our organizations.
Great, thank you for that, Jane.
If I could just jump in, I'm Chris Weeb. I'm with the National Trust. I'm the manager of Heritage Policy and other things here. Just trying to connect the dots between what Kristen was saying, and what Beth is saying. I'm just wondering too whether people are feeling overwhelmed by the need to go digital. And I'm thinking about as we move forward in this idea that we're going to be doing both. Enhance, or is it kind of both streams that we have to feed the digital and the kind of the tangible experiences at sites? I'm also just thinking, just because we've been talking about how do we handle our own conference in the future? Do you create a hybrid conference which has both aspects, and so you're creating two conferences? Is that even possible? Or do you put all your eggs in the flesh basket or in the digital basket? I think the whole kind of the burnout thing, trying to scramble around feeding a couple of different streams, if one can think about that way, conceptually in that way, I wonder if that's a challenge for the community as well.
Chris and Jane, I agree that there are a number of ways of monetizing digital content. And I agree with you, Jane, that one option is kind of the YouTube patron system. I'm just thinking from what I'm hearing from our members that they don't have the resources either in money or time to do both. And they have to be able in the future to do both in-person programming, exhibits, and programs and things, as well as they've built now a desire on the members of the public to see digital content. Both require a good deal of effort and time for staff or someone to create. And so they need to have a way of recouping some of those expenses. And in many cases, they don't have a public source of funding that will allow them to do that at the moment. So that's why I'm concerned, because I know in the museum community internationally, this is becoming something of an issue. How do we continue to do this? It's great, but we also have all this other stuff, and that whole issue of burnout comes into play as well.
Thanks, Wendy.
I'll respond to that, Jane again from Newfoundland. Here in our corner of the world, for visitor serving organizations, one of the big challenges is that, yes, they have to open their doors next year because they need income. But because the bulk of our visitation to heritage sites here is non-resident visitors, we're not, based on all the projections from the tourism industry, we're not going to return to levels of non-resident visitation, at least until, probably 2022, 2023, maybe even longer. And so it isn't really a choice of, how do I serve my on-site audiences and how do I serve off-site audiences and generate revenue? It's not an option anymore. The resident visitation, people from the surrounding communities simply aren't going to support operations through admissions fees and on-site purchases through gift shops and that kind of stuff. So organizations have to develop other revenue streams. And I agree, people already have zero capacity to expand their operations any further, but we've got to figure out a way to do it. And whether it's through, multiple organizations partnering, whether we, however we do it, I don't think it's a choice anymore.
Anyone have examples of how they are monetizing? I know there's been some great discussion in the chat. How the silver lining of opportunities that you're seeing with this new reality.
There is Andrew Murphy here. There's a few quick points I'd like to make that I haven't heard yet today that apply to the overall situation. So many of our heritage museums and buildings. What we have is this strange event for our world where the world has the flu, doesn't answer, back summer. And seen here in Nova Scotia, some organizations have completely pivoted.
Andrew, I think we're losing you. I think
effectively and use a COVID reduction. Okay, yeah.
We're not hearing you very well. Maybe you could put that in the chat box. I think there might be a bandwidth issue. Thanks. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay.
So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I don't think we intended this conversation to be totally about the impacts of the pandemic. There are other major shifts, I think, that we've all been experiencing over the last period as well. And I wondered if we could turn our conversation to hear from some of the organizations on the call today about how a desire to be part of a movement of reconciliation, greater diversity and inclusion for your organization, what that's looking like on the ground for you.
Sure, I could contribute a little bit because I was talking a bit about that earlier. And I think for us, that's something where we've had to do that through digital. We do not have the funds currently to change our built exhibits significantly, nor does our collection really reflect diversity. Until recently, our collection was very based in a collection reflects what people thought was important to collect, and we have an older collection that is got some serious gaps in it that we are trying to fill. But it means that creating exhibits that deal with different people or different groups that perhaps haven't had much attention paid is a challenge. So we've been doing it through digital, we've been doing it through podcasts, we've been doing it through partnerships with different community organizations and groups. We're trying to very actively reach out to those groups and form various partnerships, whether it be that they can join us for an episode of the podcast and share their experiences, and we'll help them do that, or whether it's for some of them finding a place for their artifacts, or where there's many initiatives we have in the pipeline that we're hoping to do, and we're hoping that we can get some more physical initiatives going forward, where we might be able to find funding somewhere to hire, for example, an Indigenous liaison who can work with Indigenous communities and with us. But it's a very slow process because you need to build relationships, you need to build trust, and adding to the amount of diversity in your organization can be a slow process too. It has to be as funding becomes available, as positions become available. So it's a challenge, but one thing we can really do is amplify those voices online and in any publications we have, because that's something that we do have a publication, the Island Magazine. So we just had our first fully bilingual issue about Acadian history on Prince Edward Island, for example, and that was an attempt to start. That's the starting point, and we were already in negotiation with the Mcrae Confederacy, which is one of the large representatives here of the Mcrae people on Prince Edward Island, to create a similarly themed issue for Indigenous concerns. And more things like that. But that's how we can do the fast stuff. The longer stuff, the longer term stuff is a lot more challenging in finding funds and finding even just objects that we can use to create meaningful exhibits in that. We have to think very creatively and start again, even for the exhibits, using digital oral history, loans from other institutions, things like that. So it can involve a lot of work.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes, I'm excited. I'm sorry that Karen Aird from the Indigenous Heritage Circle had to leave the call a few minutes ago, but we're excited at the National Trust to be jointly hiring an Indigenous intern who will work with both of our organizations and really help us look at things we've done in the past, the Endangered Places list and the idea of a historic places report card, but really looking at those ideas, those kinds of programs through an Indigenous lens as a way to really operationalize reconciliation within our organization and taking a broader view. So other examples of what organizations are doing to increase their EDI quotient, their equity, diversity, and inclusion at their organization.
Jerry Dick here, Heritage NL. Just talk about a couple initiatives that we're working on right now. One is to develop a commemorative framework that we can plug in the various subjects that we've commemorated through either through our heritage designation programs or our provincial historic commemorations programs. So we want to identify what some of those gaps are. The other piece is through an intern, again supported through Young Canada Works, is to develop a paper that looks at current thinking and best practices around inclusion. So I'd be really interested to hear if there are other groups across the country that have that are doing this kind of work and have done any research on the subject.
Natalie, if I can jump in, it's Beth Hanna from the Ontario Heritage Trust. We've been working, as you know, for some time on an initiative called Expanding the Narrative, which is about bringing forward a more honest, more authentic, more inclusive conversation of the heritage of Ontario, and to provide a space for people to share their heritage in their own voices. And we've done that through a lot of things, our website, our magazine, our social media. We have a section called My Ontario on the website, and we've been encouraging those stories. But we've also done a review of the 1,280 provincial plaques that we have across the country, across the province, to see which ones perhaps have not aged well in terms of the way they present an historical account, either that have language that is inappropriate or offensive, or are too narrow in their exploration of a theme. And we have created a list of provincial plaques that we need to address differently, either through additional information on the website or by simply replacing the text with something new. And we've started to carve that into smaller pieces, so it's not quite so overwhelming. We've started with a couple of initiatives, one of which is to engage two historians from the Black community that we've worked with over the years to specifically look at 5 of the provincial plaques and create some new text, some new thinking around how to present that information. But that's just one of the ways we're looking at our portfolio and trying to decide. We've been doing some of this work for decades, and not all of those discussions have aged very well. So we are looking very hard at how we update and re-engage on some of those topics.
Thank you, Beth. And I think we all need to find ways to build relationships and engage with other communities in ways that don't put even more pressure on them as they grapple with their own issues. So, and I think that's one of the challenges I think we face in our organizations as we try to like this sense that we have to quickly ramp up and be more representative in the work that we do. Something that we have to be conscious of. And there are some comments in the chat about other organizations doing work on their policies around diversity and inclusion. Would anyone like to talk about other measures their organizations are taking?
Natalie, it's Rob at the Ontario Historical Society. In June, with regards to Black Lives Matter, we went back to our African Canadian heritage groups that we've incorporated. So we have many across the province. And we thought it was important to talk to them, visit if possible, and show solidarity to their work. And what I found fascinating is that the feedback was, keep doing what you're doing. The Heritage Infrastructure Grant Program, both in terms of bricks and mortar and digital, is crucial to the future of their sites, and also to maintain our work on preservation of Black burial grounds and cemeteries, which are again under threat during the pandemic. There's been greater pressure, in particular with the housing prices all going up, to dig up and move them for redevelopment. So I think that's been fascinating for us is to see how we can secure funding for them, again, on this work we've all done, over the years, the Heritage Infrastructure Grant Program. Bricks and mortar, digital. Also, a number of them are having to pay property taxes on places they've saved, museums. Please stop putting property taxes onto volunteer groups that are managing sites. So it's very much been going back to the work we're doing and trying to find the energy in the pandemic to promote that work as best as possible.
Thank you, Rob. Other thoughts? How are your organizations adapting? What's what's top of mind for your organization right now?
Natalie, maybe if I may, I'll bring up a point. This is related to somewhat to the silver linings. It's always been my almost beef that I feel the heritage sector is somewhat segregated from everything else. And there are many, many reasons for that. And it was interesting, someone on my board who operates a well-known BC historic site that has a large tourist draw said a problem with the heritage sector is that it has no allies. And when push comes to shove, we don't have those strong friends to help us through the issues. And we certainly in BC, we felt that, and we were having to develop a lot of relationships very quickly. It was interesting. I did feel that the pandemic brought around this possibility of developing these relationships and opening up doors to other organizations, developing these relationships. Certainly with the trust, Natalie and your team have done so much work in bringing people together, and you initiated the Shovel Ready project. We saw that as a great opportunity for our province and worked on it for many months, providing information to the province, our counterparts. And that eventually led to a $20 million fund for what they call unique heritage infrastructure. It's the largest fund ever in BC. And it's unfortunately a one-off, but it's a great opportunity. Something that's quite special about this, the heritage is one of several streams, and it's the only stream that will be managed and administrated and judged outside of the government. And it's recognizing that there's something unique about heritage, that there's a unique language, a unique understanding, that it needs to be managed in a different way from a lot of other elements. That's fantastic. We've seen, you mentioned CHRC, Cultural Human Resources Council, and we're seeing them show more interest. They've said they have heritage in their portfolio, but have never really done too much. And now they've made a place for one or two people on their council, specifically from the heritage sector. And I think that would be a great opportunity to continue growing that. We had a meeting with Canadian Heritage around accessibility, and that's another great door that's opening up. I don't know if that's necessarily due to the pandemic, but it is a great opportunity. On the other hand, we've participated in numerous meetings with organizations, helping each other and providing information and filling out surveys and so on and so forth. And for a lot of them, they come to dead ends. And I'm disappointed that while there was an intention to build these relationships, they never really went anywhere, and a lot of them have been dropped since. And I feel that we stand to lose by not building on these relationships.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think one big learning from us during the discussions that led up to the Shovel Ready Heritage Campaign and the successful funding in BC is that the importance of us working collectively as a sector, and these kinds of conversations between leaders of organizations, opening up the conversation to others out there. It's an important way for us to gather information and work and be stronger together. There's some great, I'm sorry, distracted by some great comments here in the chat from Kirsten about the negative impact for older volunteers, but the opportunity potentially, especially with digital platforms, to engage more young people. So again, I love that silver linings approach to some of the challenges that we're facing. And the question back to Kirsten, how do we do this? So any thoughts among panelists on how to continue to do a better job of engaging bringing younger faces into the sector? I have, from experience working with youth, youth organizations, youth groups, youth organizations, youth organizations, youth groups, 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 you
boards that are in museums that are always asking, we need young people. How do we get more young people? And I've learned that the response is you must bite your tongue. Every time one of those young people offers a different way of doing something, don't say, we don't do it that way. Or we tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work. Let them try. Otherwise, they'll leave. They have no reason for staying if all they get is no. A really good example was a smaller museum in rural Saskatchewan. They happened to be close to a potash mine. So there were younger guys that were interested in working on their machinery and buildings. And they got interested enough that they wanted to be on the board. Well, that scared the heck out of all of the existing board members. And they had a conversation with the town person, and she gave them two options. She said, basically, you can either keep them out, don't let them on the board, don't let these new people participate in decision making, and know that in 10 years, your institution will not exist at all because you won't be around. Second option is you let them come in, you let them do things differently. It will be a different looking organization, but it will exist. Those are the only two options you have. And I think that's what a lot of these groups need. That's the thing they have to face. And it's the hardest thing to face. As some people have said in the chat, change is not an easy thing. And it isn't for an awful lot of people, but that's the only way that a lot of organizations are going to exist. Regardless of the pandemic, that was going to be the issue.
Great, thank you, Wendy. Yeah, I think making space is maybe the one of the themes for 2020. As we look at our structures and the way that we do business, and make sure that we're as open to sharing resources, sharing power, sharing place with underrepresented groups and a broader public. So any closing comments anyone would like to make as we start to wrap up this conversation on adaptation? Any silver linings to share with colleagues?
We actually cut our expenses because when we met in person, we always gave sandwiches to everybody, so we saved money. So I guess that's kind of a silver lining. And like I said before, more people have participated. But as we all know, the downside is it's nice to have a sandwich and then you get to chat and learn all kinds of other stuff. So I'm not sure it's really ahead.
Okay, Ingrid, did you have a
Yeah,
last word?
I just wanted to a silver lining, I think, is just bringing this group together for networking opportunities. And I think we've seen that happening this past year. And I just wanted to thank you, Natalie, for that opportunity, because I think this is a way for us to stay connected and to hear what's happening across the country and to respond to particular issues that are happening right now, but also to learn from one another. So I see this as a great networking group, and I think that's been a silver lining. I think we've met more in this last year than we have in other years. So I'm always looking for silver linings, and this is one.
Great, thank you, Ingrid. No, and I think I've said it before that it really is a sort of democratizing of the sector where we can all be part of these conversations without ever having to buy an airplane ticket or pay for a conference fee. So we'll definitely be doing more of that. So maybe just skip to the next slide. The National Trust does have a webinar coming up, and you can see the information there on your screen, and everyone who's registered for this session will get information about upcoming events. I think the next one, I don't see the topic there, but I believe it is about fundraising for heritage organizations, if I'm not mistaken. And I wanted to also mention on November 18th, so almost exactly a month from today, in lieu of a monthly gathering conversation like this one, the National Trust is hosting the Regional Climate Heritage Forum for North America. So more information to come. We're still figuring it out, but I think, again, it is one of these important pressure points that we in our work with historic places need to, it's an opportunity and an imperative for us to be part of a movement for climate action, and the work that we do is an important part of it. So stay tuned for that session on November 18th. And I think without further ado, I'll just thank everyone for participating. Thanks to all of our panelists. We'll be sharing the recording of this session and the chat conversation, which was as compelling as what was said out loud. So thanks very much, everyone, and we'll talk again. Merci beaucoup. À la prochaine.